Hello and welcome back to Dollars and Dragons. Today we have with us B. Dave Walters.
That is the dozens and dozens of my fans cheering there. Yes, hi, it is I, B. Dave Walters. You might know me from such hits as Vampire the Masquerade, LA by Night, the Black Dice Society, Invitation to Party on G4 TV, DMing for the cast of Stranger Things. Basically, if there is a camera and it involves streaming, I've done it. And then write a whole bunch of stuff on the back end. I used to DM 35 to 40 games a month. So I think I may be one of the few people that knows exactly what Friday goes through, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I did want to start off with talking about your Patreon that you ran, and you ran so many games prior to there being A-Star Playing Games that was sort of organizing it for people. Can you talk us through that and how that began and, from its humble beginnings, I suppose?
Yeah, this would have been around 2019. I felt like there would be a market for it. There was no existing infrastructure. I mean, I was by no means the first human to ever think of charging to for a seat at the table. But you're right. It was before Let's Play Games, it was before Demiplane and all of that. And I'd built up a decent following, especially because of Vampire. I mean, I'd done D&D stuff, but Vampire was where I was getting the largest response, and I just put up a Patreon. We had a Discord community, but the actual games would be via Zoom. And at first, when it started, I was scheduling the games around the people, which was easier for them but harder for me. But when I only had 6 or 12 or 20 people, that wasn't so bad. But then it very quickly became unwieldy when we got to hundreds of people. So I just started setting the times of when I was running games, and every month I'd put up the checklist at the beginning of the month of here's the times. And one of the things that a higher support tier got was first dibs at that list of picking the games. That was one of the things. And so people filled in when they'd be there. I said when I'd be there, and I would just show up. And then if there was a time where, for instance, there was an empty seat left over or something of that, I'd go to the Discord and I'd be like, hey, need one more person right now. First come, first serve. And it worked pretty well. It was a lot of fun.
How would you say that you divided up your type of offerings for that Patreon? Were you running just all one-shots? Were you running chronicles that were spanning over a long period of time and you had the same players coming back for certain games? How did that work for you?
It was a little bit of both. I constructed it in my mind as a chronicle. I had an ongoing Vampire Chronicle and an ongoing D&D campaign. But the way I did it and the way I conceptualized it in my head was the game was about the city. The game was about Los Angeles. So that was why there could be a contiguous story that was always moving forward, even though people were coming in and out of it. Even in the D&D game, I apologize, I'm slightly congested here. It's that time of year. Even in the D&D game, it was something similar. They were on a Spelljammer and they were all serving aboard the vessel, and different people got called up for different missions. So I would have roughly an idea of what was going to happen that day, but I'd show up and see who I had and then adjust from there.
Wow. Yeah, that takes a great deal of flexibility to be able to handle that. It's not different than too much different than what SPG GMs have to deal with nowadays, because signups happen until like an hour prior to the game. So some GMs are still like scrambling to get people ready to like input them into the game, and a lot of time you just include those easy story hooks in order to put people in there, like, oh, your patron or the Monster Hunter patron or whatever brings you in and drops you off or whatever. But
it's very easy when it's mission based. The earlier games of Vampire, it was the same thing. It was they were young anarchs, and Baron Victor Temple was sending them to do stuff. And then when I brought in a Camarilla game, it was the same thing though. Like not usually the Prince, not initially, but it was the Seneschal or one of the Primogen were sending you to do stuff. I mean, it's kind of a plot hook with a universal adapter. But once we had more lore built up that they were all aware of. It was easier to even innovate and do like unusual things. They were still able to kind of shock and amaze them, especially as I moved more into there is a story that is happening, like there's a wave that's moving and sometimes you all are surfing on it. And I started doing that intentionally because the Discord community was such a big part of it. I wanted them to have to go and compare notes. I wanted them to have to be like, well, we went to the butcher shop and found a foot. And it's like, well, that's weird because we were at the cemetery and we saw a man limping away. You know what I mean? And then have them be like, ooh, what? Because that was a way sort of for the story to almost be going on 24/7, which was what my real intent.
Yeah, that's really great attitude or I suppose angle for utilizing meta gameplay because that's going to be a part of it no matter what, especially if you're playing with people that aren't at the table all the time, but you can still involve them. So that's pretty good. I like that aspect of your community there. How long did you run it for?
About 18 months all told. From early 2019 to fairly deep into 2020. Because the reason why I stopped was during the pandemic, streaming took off a lot because everybody was home.
Yeah.
And I just didn't have the time to keep it spinning like I had previously. Mid to late 2020.
How long were you spending on prep for each of these games, would you estimate?
Way more at the beginning than I was later on, for certain. Because it becomes like riding a bike. And to tell you the truth, part of the reason I think I look at it as having gone to the greatest DM school ever, because again, that mastery is 10,000 hours type thing. It's just spending time in the chair just made it easier, where I became more flexible. What I found I would end up doing more of was less prep per session and more of, I completely improvised the fact that, the Toreador Primogen is having an affair. And so we get to the end of the game and I'd be like, well, if that's true, what does that mean? And then I'd be like, this, and this. And I'm like, okay. You know what I mean? Like I'd almost have to stop to think of the new state of play after the session, if that makes sense. Not before the next one. Because then when I was like, well, if that's what this means, that's cool. Okay, right. And then I'm ready. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will tell you, the strangest thing that would happen to me is quite frequently I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking I was in a session, thinking that I just dozed off, and I'd be like, yeah, okay, what are you all doing? And really have to be like, oh, okay, all right, it's nighttime. Okay. That happened 2 or 3 nights a week. That would happen.
Yeah.
So it was very much occupying a high amount of my cognitive load, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. I found I just took my first 3 or 4 days off of the year over Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that was I have to take time off. And then part of that was I'm not going to make money anyway, because I'm not going to be able to run games on Christmas.
Yep.
So, and just taking that time off, genuinely, this writing block that I had for 2 months prior to that, it just vanished. Just taking off 3.5 days.
Yeah, it's people underestimate how hard just thinking is. And the first time I encountered this was way back when I was in the insurance business, and times long past. And I'd go out and I'd enroll every day. When you have a job and the person comes in and they explain your health insurance and all that, I was that person. And I would come home and I'd just be wiped out. And I'm like, all I did was talk today. What is this? And I tell people, and when I did D&D in the castle the first time, which was 2 sessions a day for 3 days in a row, I was so wiped out afterwards. And then I went and I lived this life for a while, and I joked that I went from a 10K runner to an ultra marathoner. And I heard a statistic recently that chess champions during major games burn 6,000 calories just playing chess. It really is taxing. And you have to take a break from it. Otherwise, I don't mean to be overly cliche and say it'll stop being fun, because the reality is the moment it becomes work, there's times that you might not choose to do it, but now you got to do it. And you can still find your enjoyment in it. You must take some time to charge your batteries. And that becomes increasingly difficult in this world, especially when you are running games and writing games, and maybe even hopefully playing games and streaming games, and then writing content, maybe writing game content or something else. But it is the most important thing. I always point out to people, I'm like, look, God himself took a day off. I don't know how else to put it, So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's really keying into like what I ended up telling a lot of people was people get really excited whenever they see advice on how to get going with start playing games and like replacing their income or like going from part-time to full-time. But then I caution them, you really need to not scale up too quickly because you're going to burn out really quickly doing that. With new campaigns, that is where a majority of your prep is going to come in the front end. You front end your prep for a lot of that, onboarding all those people at the same time. And it can really quickly lead you aground. And even if you still show up physically, you may not mentally be there for all of your new players and all of your new campaigns if you scale up too quickly.
Well, another thing that is going to come up that is inevitable if you have a community component to it. And what I mean is a community component is if you have just a group of people that everybody logs in at the agreed upon time and then they disperse back into the world on their own, this will take longer than if you have a Discord, a place where they talk to each other. You will have community issues. They will start having disagreements with each other. I warned my mods in advance of what was going to happen. I told them, I like bulleted. I'm like, these are the things that will happen here. Because I saw it in every guild I ever played, in every MMO, every club. In that also starts to take an increasing amount of time to manage and take an increasing amount of the fun out of it. And once that part of it comes also, if you're not kind of like fully prepared and like armored up and ready, it can be pretty devastating when it arrives.
Resolving interpersonal conflicts and making sure that you adjust your community rules to not only reflect your values, but also provide a place for people to enjoy engaging with the community can be pretty difficult because we have so many different people from different backgrounds coming in, different perspectives, and like not everybody's the best communicator and or the nicest person.
Well, and what ends up happening, especially pending the type of game you're running, what I mean is Vampire's magnificent for this, but D&D can too. But obviously, if you're running Ravenloft versus we're Goblin Gladiators, you're gonna touch some different psychological buttons. But what ends up happening is actually putting on this mask allows you to tell the truth. And the more comfortable people start to get with themselves, the more real things start to come out, hopefully be processed. And 9 times out of 10, this is a beautiful process in the real strength of these games that I think a lot of people overlook. I think that is the most beautiful part. I had people come out of the closet. I had people resolve years-long trauma. I had people just realize who they wanted to be, get over shyness, things like that. And I don't mean this in a therapeutic sense, like we were seeking that. I mean, organically, it's just what happened. But right along with that, sometimes once you start to have some pull in a community and you're important in a community, and then new people come in and start to threaten that, it's easy to kind of start to become like Gollum, like, no, it's mine. And you have to really manage that, the integration of new people, of making sure new people have something they can do and be relevant, because if all the old people have been here and they're all not only know so much, they might actually be stronger, and then have to parse all of that stuff out. And all of these things have solutions, don't get me wrong, but it is a level of difficulty and complication that just reading the DMG doesn't prepare you for.
Definitely. I think for your situation, you chose probably the most difficult thing to do, which was a whole community shared world. I know some GMs do that, and it is a whole nother level of additional work. Most people, I think, can avoid a lot of those issues by simply compartmentalizing their tables and not having them be all one shared world. But if that's your brand and you want to work towards that, then it's pretty steady like work.
I think it's obviously a lot of it is just, quite frankly, what do you want to do? Because when you keep it compartmentalized, like again, when I just did D&D in the castle this last time, I ran the same adventure 3 times. Of course, it worked out completely differently because people make different choices, right? So it's more accurate to say I had the same inciting incident 3 times, and then it went where it went. If you're doing a shared thing, it is harder to do that because the events have taken place relative to the world. I'm doing air quotes. I know you can't see me. Sorry. To me, the reason why I made that choice is I preach this all the time. Your first and most important goal as a storyteller is to elicit an emotional reaction, to make that human being feel something. But for me, the sense of community and belonging to something is the second most important thing. Now, you can very much have that with a table of 4 to 6 people who've gone to Mordor and back. You absolutely can, and we'll share a bond. But I wanted, again, to continue this metaphor, the people to feel like they were citizens of Middle-earth. But along with that, sometimes there's beef between the elves and the dwarves.
That's a good metaphor, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think there's I think the storyteller who they are. If the idea of putting everything in boxes just made you go like, ugh, well, then that's not your thing. If the idea of knowing everybody could talk and this whole thing is kind of organically growing and you're just sort of kind of pruning the leaves, if that fills you with anxiety, do not do that thing. That is okay. It's up to you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that we end up talking about a lot is like brand development, because a lot of people show up and they're just like, I'll make the game whatever the players want it. And that's a terrible world building. And then also bad business plan, bad advertisement. Nobody knows what you're running. Like
a statement that I always come back to is that Henry Ford was not a nice person, but he is one of my all-time favorite quotes. If I'd asked them what they wanted, they'd have said a faster horse.
Yeah.
Like there's no shortage of games to play. Mm-hmm. In let's call a spade. You're not just competing with the world, you're competing with people like me. So, although I guess I'm not technically doing paid games at this exact second, but practically you are. So your only defense is to do what is authentically you, because only you can tell your story. Hopefully that is going to resonate with an audience. Now, if you find that doesn't resonate with an audience, then you have to change your story. Like I knew a group of people a couple years back that wanted to do a black and white avant-garde D&D stream. I don't think anybody wants that. And they didn't believe me, and they launched it, and of course it cratered because nobody wanted that. If your story is, I don't know, we just work in a bakery and we are all sad warforged that have lost our voice boxes, you might find 6 people that want that, maybe, maybe, but you're not going to find 600. Do what speaks to you. Do the thing that has popped into your mind. Because if, to Friday's point, if you're like, I'll do whatever you want, it's like, well, you've already lost. Because in not only do they have so many other selections, they may not even know what it is that they want. Because the default, if you're like, I'll do whatever you want, they're like, be Matt Mercer. And I'm like, well, guess what? You can't. So, tell your authentic thing, the thing that you can breathe life into. And the lamentation that I always give is nobody cares about your 15,000 years of history and backstory. Less is more. You need to know a little bit about your world, but you just need to know more about them, about your world. If you get into here, let me tell you about the War of the Gods and how the islands were formed from their blood. I'm like, they do not care. They do not care unless you find ways to sprinkle that in along the way. I was doing a talk like this, and a guy was talking about he was researching tidal tables to figure out what the tides would be for a planet with 3 moons. And I'm like, guess what, brother? Nobody cares. I'm like, if that is just your thing, if you're an oceanographic enthusiast and you find that exciting, okay, great. If you're going to make a huge plot point out of the fact that the entrance to the dungeon is only available, between these 2 hours when all of the moons are in alignment, maybe. But beyond that, nobody is going to sit at your table, play your game, and get up and say, those were some very accurate tidal tables for a planet with 3 moons. That's just, all right, bravo. That's not at all going to do it. And it's easy to get lost in the minutia, especially for beginners, that they're like, let me tell you who beget who beget who beget who. You need to know that contextually, and you can sprinkle it in the narrative if you like. Sprinkling it in the narrative, fine. But front loading a lot of dense, heavy backstory, hitting people with a lot of names they won't remember, all of that stuff is actually contrary to the process of what you're trying to get across. And I will say this last thing and stop this monologue, at least for now. For 1,000 generations, the Jedi were the peacekeepers of the Old Republic. That's the world's greatest inciting incident. That one sentence has launched hundreds of hours of content, thousands of pages of written work, from that one thing. Jedi were peacekeepers. That's cool. There used to be peacekeepers. What do you mean Jedi were the peacekeepers? They're not anymore. Old Republic. There's an Old Republic. Was there a New Republic? We've only heard of the Empire. You start unpacking it and it goes all these different places. So yeah, less is more. Okay, I'm done for now.
Speaking of less is more, let's talk about your experiences and your background in being a horror storyteller. I am interested in how you might contextualize or give advice to a D&D horror, especially because the common, I suppose, criticism of running a horror game in D&D is that the system doesn't necessarily support that.
If you haven't seen my show, The Black Dice Society, we did 60 episodes. It's all up on the Wizards YouTube. And if you want to know how I tell a horror story, go see it. It is a challenge in the sense that horror is about tension. There's many different kinds of horrors: Gothic horror, Victorian horror, psychological horror, hack and slash. But in general, when you're on a roller coaster, the slow tick, 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 they do that on purpose. Like the roller coaster doesn't have to work that way. That whole time you're like, oh, we're about to drop, we're about to drop, we're about to drop. That's actually horror. It's that release, and then the adrenaline comes, and that's the part you like. But that is, by definition, a horrifying experience. The thing about D&D, though, is the game itself doesn't have a comedic leaning, but its expression is usually comedic in the way it comes across, because I think a lot of it is innately ridiculous. It's kind of hard to take a lot of these things seriously for hours at a time. But comedy is about relieving tension. Horror and comedy serve exactly contrary purposes. And so when we were doing the Black Dice Society, I was very clear with all of them that I'm like, this is not going to be that's what she said game. This is not the yucca game. Because if I'm trying to set something up, and that's when you fit in a wisecrack, that actually diffuses the tension. Over the course of the narrative, however, you have to wave this up and down, because human beings can't maintain a heightened emotional state for more than a maximum of about 20 minutes. You can argue as high as 35 minutes. The most emotional humans can't go more than 35 minutes in a heightened emotional state. And what I mean by that is you can't cry nonstop for an hour. You can't laugh nonstop for an hour. You can't rage nonstop for an hour. Your central nervous system literally won't let you. You'll just level out again. So when you're telling the story, you can weave this up and down. And when you start paying attention to narratives, you will see this. Even in comedies, something really sad happens right around the middle, because then it swings the other way and it's and we're so funny. Horror movies, it seems like everything's actually kind of all right. We might make it after all. And then ving, 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 ving. You're like, oh no, Chainsaw Man is still alive. With D&D, one of the things I had to do is combat is a big part of the game. In horror, being outmatched by the enemy is a big part of it. You may ultimately overcome, but not initially. So I had to give them times that they could fight and they could win, but I had to make those times a lot more sparse than they would have been normally. You also go a very long way with your descriptions of things. And this is the part where I have to plug my program, 14-Day DM, where I talk about these kinds of things at length. You can find it in a pinned comment at the top of my Twitter at bdavewalters, or you can go to theundisputedacademy.com if you'd like to know more. But you describe things like sounds that they hear, claws on the wall, that something moves in the shadows. It's like in the original Aliens movie, I think the xenomorph is only on screen for some tiny bit of time, like 8 minutes, because when you don't see the thing, your brain will automatically fill in the worst possible thing. You will assume the scariest bit. Now, when people talk about the D&D combat doesn't work that way, it can when you have like something truly terrible terrible, like a Cybriax. You know, even if it's a zombie, describe the fact that hunks of flesh are falling off of it when it's coming forward. When they attack it, the sword goes through it and the stench of rotting flesh fills the room, and it just looks at you with unblinking eyes and says, you know, there's ways you can do it. It does not do a horror game as well as, say, Call of Cthulhu, but that's what Call of Cthulhu's built for. Call of Cthulhu is not going to do a gladiatorial contest as well as D&D does. So yeah, at least my initial monologue.
Just looked up Cybriax for the first time. That's horrible.
Oh, my juicy boy. Hold on a second. Oh no, I love him. I love him so much. That's my juicy boy. You can't see the camera. I'm showing Friday my Cybriax mini.
That's
look
disgusting.
at the juice. Look at the juice.
So disgusting.
Oh, they're the worst, and I love them so much. They're terrible enemies, by the way. If you ever do something at that CR, they're terrible. I did somebody once asked me, it was a Jess Pinlay had started this on Twitter, saying what was the most delicious creature to eat in D&D. And her argument was it must be the unicorn because it's expressly forbidden for you to eat a unicorn. So it must be really great if it must be banned. And I said, I think the Cybriax is the yummiest because everything about this thing screams, do not put this in your mouth. And that means maybe you should put it in your mouth. I will say one other thing, which works just as a storytelling device in general, but particularly good in horror too, is imperiling other. You know, like for the most part, heroes are fearless and they're not afraid to die, but they're afraid to let someone else die because of them. You know, lean into that. But if you do this, giant flashing lights, they really do need a chance to save the other people. Like they really do. Like, I mean, you can have your scene where Sephiroth kills Eris, spoiler alert, if the narrative just absolutely requires that you hate Sephiroth that much. But be very, 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 very sparing in that type of thing. 9 times out of 10, if you're going to see Sephiroth be about to kill Aerith, there should be a way for them to save her. But that's the kind of thing that will build an emotional response very quickly. The very first stream I ever did, the Theogony of Kairos, was about level 0 characters who were chosen by the gods to become avatars, and they would get level 20 powers. And I knew if I started in episode 1 and I just gave them powers and I said like, oh, that's the kid who's always bullied you, they're like, cool, disintegrate. Versus if I spent some time in the village and put a face on these people and who they were, then when I imperiled the village, which I did, of course, it would mean something. It's not just the baker's daughter is trapped in a burning building. It's your best friend Anzra is trapped in a burning building. Now that means something. And that works doubly well with horror. That it's like, here's this person I've come to really care about. The Cybriax has her and is about to give her a second mouth on her kneecaps. Maybe I should do something. Also, I would just like to say one last thing. Right now, Friday, who is always beautiful, is wearing a sweatshirt that says life is good, keep it simple. That is what you must remember, Good Friday, is you go for, take a pic, hang that hoodie somewhere where you can see it every day.
Well, you know how it is being a freelancer. So I've been thinking about this, and like whenever I end up finding a role that is like full-time, I'll probably go to part-time pro GMing, just so that I can like function and also have healthcare. But so I've been thinking about that for 2023. I don't think that I will end up staying full-time because of how draining it is to run 12 to 14 games a week. But yeah, I'll end up doing that. I've been really falling in love with the process of development and designing with a group of people. The Vineyard is now like a very large team, initially unintentionally, but simply because I sent out emails to everyone that I wanted to work with, and like they all said yes. So that I started with a pretty big team. And then we kind of identified some things that we were missing down the road and then added them to the team. You and Into the Motherlands lead developer. Let's talk about that if you don't mind. I am curious about your process with team building and like what's your schedule like for just being the lead developer of Into the Motherlands. Like it's probably like only a little bit here and there, but like when you're involved with the project, what is it that you're doing?
We had, I'm trying to be careful, make sure I don't say too much. We would have a monthly get together where we all talked about where we were, and I would kind of quarterback, well, we need this to happen and this to happen. Tanya DePass is the creative director, and we kind of split that up between the two of us of these things are what needs to happen. Most of my thing has been mechanical, but I've been heavily involved in the narrative side of it too, because the narratives have to inform those mechanics, you know, like if we're doing psionics, then there need to be some psionic people type thing, you know. What I knew and what has come to pass was at the beginning of the production, same thing. We had a pretty big team, pretty much got who we wanted. We were very fortunate with the Kickstarter that we had the budget, and when you have the money, you can get anybody, which is weird. I'm not used to that. I'm used to bootstrapping everything, but when being like, what's your rate? And they're like, it's this. And you're like, well, we got that. So yeah, get that guy, you know? We were slightly constrained by the fact that we wanted to work with all POC on the development team, but of course we've gotten some wonderful people there. But what I knew in advance is what I told everybody from the very beginning was we're making this thing from scratch. We'd already laid out the bones of some things because we'd done 2 seasons of the stream by then. Most of that stuff were things that I just made up on the spot. But I'd ask people, I said, create the thing that you needed when you were 8 years old. Tell me that story. That's what I want. And so people were really coming back with these really great things. And I mean, not only did we have a whole planet, we had multiple worlds. So it was easy to hook some things in, but some things that were just dope, but really truly didn't fit, we were like, great, you're over there on that planet. You know what I mean? This is how it goes down over there. So as we assigned all this stuff out to people, what I knew was I was going to be the bottom of the funnel. It was up to me to smooth it all out. Anything that was missing, anything we found out we needed, anything people didn't deliver on was going to fall to me. And we're at that point in the development now. So it is a lot more hands-on for me now. Unfortunately, it got the most hands-on for me when just a lot of tough stuff happened for me. I lost my father right at the very end of October, and just sort of life turned gray after that. So that has been a struggle that I'm continuing to struggle with, although starting to make some progress on now. But it's almost like, to answer your question, it was like it is a seesaw that has teetered over time to now, like almost all of it is with me now and will be with me until I'm like, here's all the words, and then give it back for formatting and layout. But it's been a long process, but we haven't had much stress, because one of the things that I've said from the beginning, I read this in an issue of Nintendo Power when I was a kid, which dates me to a very narrow window in time, when they were talking about the development of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, which limits me to an even narrower window in time. And that game was catastrophically late. And they had a mural painted on the wall of Nintendo headquarters that a late game is only late until it comes out, and a bad game is bad forever. It's like, it is more important that we make the best thing that we can, because once it exists, no one's ever going to remember how long it took in development. They're just going to be like, it's here. And if we put out something that is subpar, because let's be honest, we're all POC, so we're going to get a very critical gaze anyway, and heaven forbid it actually be bad, you know, will be terrible for everybody. So we've been slow boating. We went back and forth with the publisher. We had a publisher, lost a publisher, and now we're in talks with different publishers. So it's been a juggle.
I inadvertently ended up kind of in this role as the co-creator. I remember back in early 2022, and I was working for Jasmine at the time, and I was like, you know, Jasmine, it's really hard to like get gigs as a writer, because like there's like 5 people with all the poker hands in the industry. And I was like, how do you get gigs? And she was like, well, you're good at project management, why don't you just run your project? And I was like, okay. And that's how like the Vineyard started for me. So but seeing a lot of the work come back when I like assign things to different people, and my great joy has been like for me to develop an idea just a little bit, because it was for my campaign initially, and that's how a lot of these ideas came to fruition, to give it over to someone and just allow them to develop something either based on their perspective in a different culture, like you were saying, and like come back to me with something that's fully fleshed out and just so alive. It's been I remember, especially with the initial round of first drafts, but a lot of these drafts that I get back, I'm just blown away by, and I'm very happy about. And that role being like the developer to just sort of guide people along that path as a creator creator is so fucking cool. And I, for sure, that's me running the vineyard and doing this part of it has really solidified the fact that I'm going to go into that work when I can, not like if, but when I can, and go from there. But working collaboratively with people on like developing creative stuff is super cool. And I've been thankful to have had the opportunities that I've had thus far to develop those things. When do you think?
I was going to say it's definitely a renaissance for such things. That's all I was going to say.
What are you allowed to talk about in Into the Motherlands that you're exceptionally like proud of looking at it right now?
Oh, that we've made it this far, that it exists, you know, that we got the support that we got from the Kickstarter, which was important. That there is an appetite, an Afrocentric point of view in storytelling in sci-fi. I mean, I'm not a fool. I do know a lot of people sort of put their money on the barrelhead as just a support from the project and aren't necessarily that excited about the thing. But I don't take that personally because we needed them to spend that money. But what I'm hoping is when they get it and they open it and they actually look at it, they're like, oh, this is actually really cool. And I'm like, yeah, it really is. And enjoy it, you know? Is what I'm looking forward to. Seeing, as I said, that I asked these people to create, you know, what they needed when they were 8 years old, and seeing what that looked like. Because that is always the two notes I ever really give. You know, the inciting incident of this, the crux of this, is it's a world without colonialization. You know, what would have happened if that particular cruelty hadn't spread across the planet? In this instance, it's because we had to take a lot of people and put them on another planet, and they just sort of developed separately. Two, it's self-determination. You know, the game doesn't have an attribute system because it is about your skills and your values. You are who you choose to become in this world. And so whenever we didn't really know about which way to go with something, we'd always come back to that. It's like, well, what's a more self-determinate thing? You know what I mean? Like what is more strength to the individual if it works this way or works that way? And always being able to come back to that has been a great thing. So it's kind of like the design ethos has held through the whole thing, and hopefully is going to resonate with the players when the book's finally in their hands.
Right now, are you in you're not in playtesting, right? You're still developing?
Oh yeah. No, okay. We play tested multiple rounds, in fact. Yeah. And then the stream, season 3, which is on now. I mean, not now because I guess it's the holidays. They're in the midst of season 3. Has been the ultimate play test of beating on it and seeing where something breaks.
Got it. Okay. Super cool. Let's talk about Undisputed Academy and what caused you to pivot towards that.
It's, you know, something I found about myself is when I love a thing, I love doing that thing, I love talking about that thing, and I love teaching that thing, whatever it is. Is this martial arts, writing, whatever. That's just who I am as a person. And I realized a lot of people want to be able to do some of the things that thankfully I've been blessed to do. And I wanted to take the time to encapsulate the actual practical tools that a person needs to play the game at a high level or run the game at a high level from someone who has done it, and quite frankly, as high level as it gets. You know, that I've been on the biggest stages with this as a player and as a storyteller for multiple systems. To my knowledge, at least arguably, no one else has done. And so I wanted to be able to write down their videos, to capture forever that like, these are the things you need to work on. These are the things that you need to be mindful of, to try and remove at least some of the trial and error. And I wanted to do it in such a way that even people that have no ambition to be on camera, but just want to be able to give the absolute best experience to the people that are sharing the table with them, would still find value.
Yeah, I've gone through the GM and the player, and I just saw that you just dropped a writing one, so I guess I'll have to get that as well. But I found this is the thing that I end up coming back to a lot of the time is people, you can find advice anywhere, but I think it's important for people, especially when you're just starting out your business or you're just starting out your profession, perhaps just focus in on and try to identify who you most associate with and can find wisdom by following their example, or someone who says things that resonate with you, and then you follow those 2 to 5 people, and then that would be it as far as your professional development, because you can definitely start going in every direction and like not get anywhere.
Yeah. I think it's you're completely right. It's to use a different example in the martial arts, which I don't know if y'all know, Friday has a martial arts background and is incredibly lethal. Don't mess with her. But I was just listening to somebody last night that was talking about what's the best martial art. And the answer the person gave was like, well, for who? You know, like if you're a big, tall guy with a long reach, that is very different than if you're a 5-foot woman. I'm gonna give you a very different answer. What can you do? And it's the same thing to Friday's point there. If you are a calm, reserved, following the path and example of a very boisterous, gregarious, outgoing person may not be the thing, because what they're telling you to do won't resonate with you. I think that the number one thing to look for is opportunities to just advance your path, essentially. Just things to be mindful of that you might not have thought of. Like in the writing program I did, 14-day writer. All I said was I'm gonna shave 5 years off your process of becoming a professional writer. It is not something that'll start you from the beginning if you've never done it. This is assuming you have some skill. Here's some things to be mindful of that will help you, because I've published comic books and graphic novels and screenplays for film and television, gotten them all produced, which is all unusual. It's hard to do any one of those things. I've done them all. I've self-published novels. And here's how. This is the way to do it. This is how to tell stories of different genres in a way that is effective. And what separates a horror story from an action story, or if you're going to make an action horror story, things of that nature. But Friday's absolutely correct. And I will just add one other thing to that. It is possible to learn what not to do from people. It is possible to be like, I don't like that thing you just said, and I'm going to do not that. And it is okay if your brand ends up being, you know, if everybody's doing comedy right now, and there's a lot of it, expressly choose to do not comedy, for instance. That's all very valid.
Thank you so much for stopping by, B-Dave. And I guess we'll see you again at some point, right?
Pleasure's all mine. Whenever the beacons are lit, I will answer. All right, y'all have a good one.
Thanks so much for listening to the Dollars and Dragons podcast. If you'd like to support me, and more importantly, my editor who does all of the heavy lifting here, then you can subscribe to patreon.com/isfriday. And that is going to go straight to my editor. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.